What's up you guys, Mo Awesome from Awesome MTB. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the Awesome MTB Fall Bike Buyer's Guide. What's up you guys, Mo Awesome from Awesome MTB. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to our Awesome MTB Fall Bike Buyer's Guide. Now this is gonna be our XC shootout portion of this buyer's guide, but if XC bikes aren't for you, we also have e-bikes, gravel, and normal pedaling bikes. And if those categories aren't for you, be sure to subscribe because we have so many more shootouts and buyer's guide planned for 2026. We really do appreciate all the support. And if you guys do enjoy these series, if you guys can leave a comment, it really does help out the channel a ton. I also want to give a huge thank you to the companies that made this series possible, and that is Formula 100, Tailwind Nutrition, Feedback Sports, Pit Viper Sunglasses, and Jensen USA. Now in today's video, we are going to be breaking down the Salsa Spearfish. Now this was a bike that I'm going to say has to be one of the biggest surprises for me in the year 2025. When I unboxed it, I looked at it, I looked at the build, and I thought to myself, this is a Salsa bike. I was kind of curious because my last time riding a Salsa was actually a Salsa Fargo way back when I was working in bike shops. I used it as a commuting bike. So starting things off, what is the Salsa Spearfish? Well, it has 120 millimeters of travel up front, 120 millimeters of travel in the rear. Now this is the Salsa Spearfish Deluxe, so it's their higher end carbon offering. And this right here is a size extra large test bike. I'm 6'2" for reference. Now the bike itself features a split pivot suspension platform, which is a little bit different than some of the other flex day bike options, just a little bit more traction under braking. And another thing, if you guys missed it about the frame itself, there is so many bosses on this bike. You can actually fit 3 water bottles in the frame. That is absolutely insane. And once again, it is gonna go back to that word adventure. Now this right here is the deluxe transmission build. So we have a full flight attendant build with a RockShox Sid Ultimate flight attendant fork up front and a RockShox Sid Lux Ultimate rear shock, once again, flight attendant. Now we do get the whole flight attendant system. So we have a Reverb AXS dropper post. We have a SRAM EXO transmission drivetrain with the power meter to pair up with the flight attendant system. Up front for the cockpit, we have some pretty wide Salsa carbon handlebars on there with SRAM level ultimate brakes for stopping power. And for wheels, we do have a carbon WTB CZR wheel set. Now this is gonna be a wide trail wheel set, and we do have Terraville tires on here. So these are gonna be the Camrocks, and you do have them in 29 by 2.4. I will say I didn't have the best of luck with the Terravilles, especially out here in South Mountain. Kind of flatted right away on those. Swapped the rear out to the Maxxis Recon. I've had a ton of flats during this entire buyer's guide. We'll talk about that in the conclusion video and figure out what tires I think are best. Now in terms of bike weights, the Salsa Spearfish is coming in at about 27.29 pounds, and that is with Shimano XT pedals. Now before we go over what I absolutely love about the Salsa Spearfish and some things that I don't necessarily love, we're going to take this thing out on the trails and you guys can get our test loop here in South Mountain, Arizona. Welcome to another bike review today, the Salsa Spearfish. And I would actually say this is probably the bike in the test that came out of absolutely nowhere. The way I learned about this bike is we were actually at Sea Otter and there was an employee there, and I think he was celebrating his 30th year working for Salsa, which is insane. One of the first things you notice with the Spearfish, especially out here in the desert, is how at home it feels at South Mountain. It has short stays, but a long reach. So you get that maneuverability from the rear end, but a really good track from the front end. As you guys can tell, no issues going up those tech sections. A ton of chunk and a ton of tight, twisty sections. And taking the Spearfish up, once again, those short stays help a ton maneuverability-wise, but you definitely have a much longer reach than the other bikes in this test. I would say taller riders rejoice. Now, the stack height, though, is slightly on the lower side, which is interesting, especially on tech climbs. I feel like I like to have my bars a little higher, but overall, very manageable on the Spearfish. True impressive thing is traction. Coming to here, no issues on the Spearfish. That suspension profile, so nice. And even nicer under braking on the downhills. and we'll touch on that soon. A little bit of downhill, and this is where stuff starts to get really fun on the Spearfish. Like I said, unapologetically adventure, I think sums up the Spearfish. It's just one of those bikes that wants to get rowdy, and kind of insane given its weight, how stable it feels. Notice with the Spearfish, that combination, short stays, long reach, and just a very tracting rear suspension, it just feels like the level of rowdiness you can get into on this bike, insane for an XC bike. I don't think it falls in that XC race spectrum, although I do think you can race it. I think it'd be great there. But where I think it really does shine is endurance adventure. Those long bike packing trips, just anything where you gotta put in the time. It's gonna be a long distance, but you're still gonna get rowdy. That Spearfish, great companion for that style of riding. Don't get me wrong, like I said, it's still an amazing pedaler and you can still race it, but it is definitely one of the more capable bikes in the test. All right, nice. Hold the line so well. Oh, how's it going? How you doing? You guys will see through here, very capable as well, which is why I really do feel like this is kind of like a mini trail bike, but just in a cross-country race offering, if that makes sense. Coming into a section like this, it's nice, tight, and twisty. I will say those short stays, as much as they make that maneuverability really easy, in the size XL, it does feel like I would just want those rear stays slightly longer. You know, that's for my style of riding. And I know there's a lot of riders out there, especially in the adventure world. I kind of swear by those short stays, especially when you start to get tired and you need to maneuver your bike, tight, twisty courses. Right through here, so capable. Up and over here, no issues on that Spearfish. I ride through the chunk. Now this is gonna be the interesting part, but I'm gonna talk about the suspension profile. Once again, the coolest thing about the Spearfish is, like I said, unapologetically adventure. And I do feel like them going with that split pivot suspension profile, you can feel the difference in braking. There definitely is, oh my God, I took the wrong line there. There definitely is some added traction which saves you on sections like that. Feel that traction under braking, and especially out here. I mean, you guys see how sharp it is. Coming into sections like this where I'm kind of trying to check up my line or my speed, and it's still super chunky, you feel that added traction element to the Spearfish. And I would say it's probably the most confidence-inspiring suspension platform out of the more XC-oriented bikes in this test. And I think riders who take the Spearfish into places where you might not traditionally take a cross-country full suspension will definitely appreciate that element to it. Like I said, I'm on the brakes. Oh my God, just getting super rowdy with my line choice, going a little bit faster than the other bike, and overall, ton of traction. I think when you are picking your bike out, and we'll touch on this in the conclusion, I do think you really have to be honest with yourself. What are you gonna be using your bike for? And I think that rider that wants that XC race style bike, but wants to go on a ton of adventures with it, is really gonna appreciate the Spearfish for its downhill performance. Feeling so much fun on the Spearfish, and a lot of that comes to taking lines that are a little on the rowdier side. What an awesome bike. Let's get back and talk about it. All right, so the first thing that I absolutely love about the Salsa Spearfish is how adventure ready it feels. The second you hop on this bike and you take it out on the trails, it has a little bit of a different style feel than the other XC race style bikes in this test. You can tell the Salsa Spearfish wants to have fun. It has a lot of confidence coming from a very long reach. The stability up front is pretty mind-blowing, and when you pair it with those shorter stays, this is probably the shortest chainstay out of the bunch, but it also has, like I said, that longer reach, so you get a ton of stability from the front end, but so much fun maneuverability from the rear end of the bike. You can constantly whip this thing around out on the trails, and once again, that blend of confidence from the front with super fun maneuverability from the rear is pretty insane, especially out here in South Mountain with all of the chunk. Now, helping with that was another thing that I loved about the Salsa Spearfish, and that was the suspension design. That split pivot suspension design is so much fun out here in South Mountain. You can definitely tell over some of the other flex day options in this bike, there was a little bit bit more added traction under braking, and you definitely feel that out here in South Mountain. Once again, it is all chunk, and you really do feel any subtle differences in traction, especially over the chunk. And I constantly was impressed by just how much traction the Salsa Spearfish had, especially when things got steep and techy and I was on the brakes a little bit more so. I will say, if you're an everyday rider, you're not necessarily going for an XC World Cup bike, you are going to appreciate that, especially on more fun-oriented rides. I could totally see this being that one bike quiver, especially if you have been dabbling in that XC realm. You don't want to go full XC. I still think you get a lot of the XC efficiency on the Salsa Spearfish, and you can still race this. I still think it's a race-worthy bike. However, it also has a very fun profile to it, and once again, we're going to keep going back to that word adventure. It's ready for adventure. Now that leads us to another thing I love about the Salsa Spearfish is the adventure aspect to it. Once again, you have room for 3 bottles on this bike, and I don't understand why more brands don't do room for 3 bottles, especially on flex day option bikes. And I would say anytime that I'm going XC and I'm in spandex, I don't really want to bring a pack, and having the ability to run 3 bottles in the bike and still have more bosses on top of that. And on top of that, like I said, the bike has very short rear stays. So if this bike was weighted down with bike bags, like say you had a handlebar bag, say you had frame bags, say you had a little bit more weight on here, the bike itself is still going to be very maneuverable via those short rear chainstays. And once again, I do think that Salsa made that with intention. I do think that if Salsa intended this to be a World Cup racing bike, they would go a little bit longer on those rear stays, and they didn't. And that front stack height is also relatively low as well. And I think Salsa knows that a lot of people are going to be packing this thing down and hitting the trails probably with intent. And once again, going back to the keyword with the Salsa Spearfish, and that's going to be adventure. And I really do feel like the Salsa Spearfish is up for any adventure out there. It was truly insane how efficient it felt on the climbs while still being very maneuverable and having the ability to run those 3 bottles and more gear and more bosses. Once again, this is an adventure efficient XC bike, and I definitely was very impressed by it. Now, what are some things that I didn't necessarily love about the Salsa Spearfish? For me personally, I think that front stack height is a little on the lower side. Once again, I'm 6'2", have a high saddle height. I just appreciate taller stack heights. I know on XC, a lot of companies are going a little bit on the shorter side, but for me personally, I would say this was probably a little too short. I would definitely have to run a lot of spacers underneath my fork, which I do have it set up with here. I would like to see size proportional and chainstays on there, but once again, I don't think the intention of this bike, like I said, is full World Cup XC level racing. I think adventure is the name of the game here, and I had a blast on this bike ride after ride. The XC efficiency is there. However, I will say size proportional chainstays would have been nice. So who's the Salsa Spearfish for? I would say if you're that rider out there that you want a do everything XC style bike, you definitely want to go with that lightweight 120mm XC platform. However, say you still want to be able to ride a majority of your trails locally, you don't want to be held back by your bike, I think this would be a very good do everything XC style bike. Like I said, the efficiency is there from the suspension platform. It's really awesome traction under braking, and overall it is a blast to ride on the descents. That rear end, so fun to whip in and out of corners, and it really did make everyday trail rides a blast. I absolutely love the fact that you have room for 3 bottles in the frame. This build is absolutely awesome. Shout out to the Salsa Cycles team with the Salsa Spearfish. How did this bike compare to the other bikes in this test? You guys will have to stick around to the conclusion video of our XC Buyer's Guide. Stay tuned for that. Consider subscribing. Let me know in the comment section if I didn't answer any of your questions about the Salsa Spearfish. And until next time, you guys, ride awesome.